In the previous segment, we saw that during the Industrial Revolution, people gained control of cheap and abundant energy, as well as cheap and abundant raw materials. And the result of combining the two was an explosion in human productivity. The explosion was felt first and foremost in agriculture. Usually, when we think about the Industrial Revolution, we think about cities. We think about an urban landscape of smoking chimneys and the terrible working conditions of workers in factories, like in the novels of Charles Dickens and Émile Zola. However, the Industrial Revolution was first and foremost the second agricultural revolution. It first and foremost affected agriculture and what was happening in the production of food. During the last 200 years, industrial production methods became the mainstay of agriculture. Machines, such as tractors, began to do all kinds of work that previously was performed by the muscle power of humans and animals or not performed at all. Fields and animals became much more productive thanks to the usage of industrial products like artificial fertilizers, artificial insecticides, and an entire arsenal of industrially produced hormones and medications. Refrigerators, airplanes, ships, and trucks have made it possible to store agricultural produce like grain or fruits or meat for months and even years, and then to transport it quickly and cheaply to the other side of the world. So Europeans today can eat fresh beef from Argentina or fresh sushi from Japan. Even the plants and animals themselves were mechanized, were turned into machine. Just at the period when Homo sapiens was elevated to divine status by the humanist religions, farm animals stopped being viewed as living creatures that could feel pain and distress, and instead came to be viewed and treated simply as machines for producing food. Today, farmyard animals are often mass-produced in factory-like facilities. Their bodies are shaped by scientists in accordance with industrial needs. And chickens and cows and pigs and so forth pass their entire lives as parts of some giant production line. The length and quality and conditions of their existence are determined by the profits and losses of business corporations that own them. Even when the industry takes care to keep these animals alive and reasonably healthy and well-fed, the industry has no intrinsic interest in the social and psychological needs of the animals, except when these have a direct impact on production. For example, egg-laying hens have a very complex world of behavioral needs and drives and desires. Hens feel strong urges to scout, walk around and scout their environment, to forage, to peck around, to determine social hierarchies among themselves, to build nests, and to groom themselves and the chicks and other chickens. However, the egg industry takes these hens and locks them inside tiny cages. And it is not uncommon in the industry, for example, to squeeze 4 hens to a single small cage, each hen being given floor space of just 22 by 25 centimeters. This is common in the industry. The hens receive enough food, but they are unable to claim a territory, to build a nest, to engage in other natural activities, or indeed, the cage in which they live is so small that usually the hens are unable even to flap their wings or to stand fully erect. They are just squeezed there for their entire lives, producing egg after egg after eggs. The same things are happening in the meat industry. Pigs are among the most intelligent and inquisitive of mammals, second only to the great apes. Yet in industrialized pig farms, pigs and sows are routinely confined in very small cages. In industrialized farms, sows are confined into such small crates, cages, that they literally are unable to turn around, not to mention to walk or to forage. The sows, the female pigs, are kept in these crates day and night for 4 weeks after they give birth. They are kept in the crates with their offspring, and they can't even move. They just stand there, letting the offspring suck from. They receive food from the managers, and they feed the young. And after 4 weeks, the young, the small piglets, are taken away to be fattened up and then butchered. Whereas the sows are impregnated again with the next bunch of piglets, and once the piglets are born, again they are stuffed into these tiny crates. The reason they are stuffed into crates without even being able to move around is because the managers are afraid, for all kinds of reasons. One of them is that the managers of the farms are afraid that the sows will accidentally crush one of the piglets, so they just stuck them in the crates, and they are not able to move. They spend a month inside such crates. In the dairy industry, there are similar practices. Many dairy cows that produce milk live almost all their allotted years inside a small enclosure. They stand and sit and sleep in their own urine and excrement. They receive whatever food and hormones and medications are needed from one set of machines. They bring them food, and then another set of machines milk the cows every few hours, and the cow in between is treated by the industry as little more than another machine, a machine that takes in raw materials and gives out the product milk, and that's what it does. That's the whole thing. Treating living creatures which have complex emotional and sensory worlds as if they were only machines is of course likely to cause them not only a lot of physical discomfort, but also much social stress and psychological frustration. You can see here before you a picture of one such industrial farm that produces chickens. You see here a picture of young chicks on a conveyor belt in an industrial hatchery. Male chicks and imperfect females are sorted out of the conveyor belt by the workers and are thrown away to be crushed in the garbage, or sometimes they are dropped into automatic shredders that shred the chicks, which are useless. This is an industrial farm that produces hens for laying eggs. Male chickens and imperfect female chickens, they are useless, so they are just being thrown away to the garbage or shredded in industrial shredders, and then the shredded stuff is used to feed other animals. Over the world, hundreds of millions of chicks die each year in such hatcheries. Now, this is not caused by any hatred of animals. Just as the Atlantic slave trade did not result from hatred towards Africans, so also the modern animal industry is not motivated by animosity. It is fueled mainly by greed coupled with indifference, not caring about the fate of these creatures. Most people who produce and consume eggs and milk and meat today in the world rarely stop to think about where this is coming from, about the fate of the chickens and the cows and the pigs whose flesh and emissions they are eating. Those who do think about such things often argue that such animals are simply machines, that they have no world of sensations and emotions, and they are not capable of suffering. What is really ironic is that the same scientific disciplines that are used in order to shape our milk machines and egg machines have over the last few decades demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt that mammals and birds do have a complex sensory and emotional system, and they are able not only to feel physical pain, but they are also capable of suffering from emotional distress. We know this, among other things, from studies in evolutionary psychology. Evolutionary psychology maintains that the emotional and social needs of animals, including farm animals, evolved in the wild over millions of years, when these needs and desires and emotions were essential for the survival and reproduction of the species. For example, in the wild, cows had to know how to form close relations with other cows and bulls, or else they could not survive and reproduce. In order to learn the necessary social skills, evolution over millions of years implanted calves, like the young of all other social mammals, with a very strong urge, desire to play. Playing is the way that young mammals learn social behavior. Evolution implanted calves, the young of cattle, with an even stronger desire to bond with their mothers, to stay close to their mothers, because the milk and the care of the mother cow was obviously essential for the survival of the calf. Now, what happened in modern industry if farmers now take a young calf, separate her from her mother, put her in a closed cage, give her food and water and injections against all kinds of diseases, and when she is old enough, inseminate her with sperm from a bull? From an objective perspective, this calf no longer needs either maternal bonding or playing with other calves in order to survive and reproduce, because people take care of all of that. However, from a subjective perspective, from the perspective of the calf itself, the calf still feels a very strong urge to bond with her mother and to play with other calves. If these urges, which were implanted in the calf by millions of years of evolution, if these urges are not fulfilled, the calf suffers greatly. This is the basic lesson of evolutionary psychology. A need or a desire which was shaped in the wild continues to be felt subjectively, even if it is no longer really necessary for survival and reproduction. The great tragedy of industrial agriculture is that it takes care of the objective needs of animals, but completely neglects their subjective needs. The truth of this theory is not something new we just discovered in the last 5 or 10 years, but was known at least from the 1950s and 1960s. In the 1950s, a very famous American psychologist, Harry Harlow, studied the development of young mammals by using young monkeys for the experiment. What Harlow did back in the 1950s is to separate infant monkeys from their mothers several hours after birth. The monkeys were isolated alone, each monkey alone, inside a cage without any other monkey, and were raised by dummy mothers. In each cage, Harlow placed two dummy mothers. One dummy mother was made of metal wires and was fitted with a milk bottle so that the infant monkey could suck and eat. The other dummy mum was made from wood covered with cloth, which made her resemble a real monkey mum, but this soft mum, clothed mother, it did not provide the infant monkey with any food. It was just a statue. Now, Harlow and many other theoreticians, they assumed that the infants would cling to the nourishing metal mother, which provides them with what they need, food, whereas they won't care much about the barren, clothed mother, which did not provide them with anything. But to the great surprise of the scientists, the infant monkeys showed a very, very clear preference for the clothed mother, spending most of their time with her. As you can see in this picture, when the two mothers were placed in close proximity, when the two dummies were placed side by side, the infant monkeys continued to hold the clothed mother even when they reached over to suck milk from the metal mother. Harlow at first suspected that perhaps the infants did so because they were cold and they tried to warm themselves in the arms of the clothed mother. So he fitted an electric bulb inside the wire mother, which now radiated more heat than the clothed mother. Nevertheless, the vast majority of the baby monkeys continued to prefer the clothed mother. Because this was the conclusion that they reached, because monkeys and other mammals, they look for something more in their parents than just material needs. They also have very deep, important psychological and emotional needs. And the infant monkeys thought, mistakenly, but we can understand why, they thought that the mother that looks like a real monkey, she may provide them with their emotional needs more than this metal installation. Follow-up research showed that Harlow's orphaned monkeys, which did not receive any of their emotional and psychological needs, even though they received all the food and medications and water and everything else, nevertheless, they grew up to be emotional wrecks. And even though they received all the material needs, they never managed to fit into monkey society. They had difficulty communicating with other monkeys, and they suffered constantly from very high levels of anxiety and aggression. The conclusion from this and many other experiments was that monkeys must, and other mammals, have psychological and emotional needs and desires that go far beyond the material requirements of food and water and health. And if these emotional needs are not fulfilled, they will suffer greatly. And again, in the following decades, similar experiments, similar studies showed that this is true, not only for monkeys, but also for other mammals, even for birds, and for humans. Harlow's experiment on the infant monkeys actually produced a revolution in the practices of raising human children. In the 1940s and 50s, psychologists who were specializing in children, they thought that what children really need is just material care. For instance, in orphanages, after the Second World War in Europe, there were hundreds of thousands of orphaned children. So there was a huge age for orphanages. And in the orphanages, according to the wisdom of those days, they they took strong measures to separate the children one from the other and from any contact with adults because they fear disease. The main idea was what children need is food and water and medication, And the big threat for children is the spread of epidemics in these orphanages. So they maintain a very strict regime of allowing children as little contact as possible with other people, including other children, to prevent disease. And the result was a huge rate of death, and even those orphans who survived suffered from all kinds of psychological traumas and problems. What was realized in the 1950s and 60s because of the experiments on monkeys is that mammals, including humans, they have needs, emotional needs, that can be provided only by close contact with other members of your species. So today, the entire logic of how to raise children, including orphans, is just the opposite. They need as much contact as possible with other people, not to be separated and isolated. So this is now the accepted wisdom, both about raising children, human children, and about other animals, at least about mammals. However, industrial agriculture ignores these findings completely when it comes to raising animals like cows and pigs and so forth. So industrial agriculture raises a lot of ethical, moral dilemmas. However, what cannot be ignored is, and this is why it keeps going, is the immense contribution it made to human productivity. Altogether, billions of farmyard animals today live as part of some kind of mechanized assembly line, and about 10 billion animals are slaughtered each year by industrial agriculture in order to support our economy and our affluent lifestyle. These industrial methods of agriculture, of raising animals, is one of the things that led to a very sharp increase in the productivity of agriculture and in human food reserves. Together with the mechanization of plant cultivation, of the cultivation of wheat and potatoes and rice and corn and so forth, industrial animal husbandry has been the basis for the entire modern socio-economic order. Because before the industrialization of agriculture, most of the food that was produced by farmers was wasted on feeding the farmers themselves and the farmyard animals. Only a small percentage of the food was available to feed teachers and priests and bureaucrats and workers in the cities. Consequently, in almost all previous societies, peasants comprised more than 90% of the population, and this was true until the early 20th century. Only following the industrialization of agriculture, it was possible for a smaller and smaller number of farmers to produce more and more food in order to feed all the clerks and teachers and factory workers in the cities. Today, in the United States, for example, only 2% of the population make their living from agriculture. But these 2% produce enough food with all the industrial methods of agriculture to feed not only the other 98% of the population, but also to export surplus food to the rest of the world. The United States is one of the world's biggest exporters of food. Without the industrialization of agriculture, the urban industrial revolution in the cities and factories could never have taken place. There would not have been enough hands and brains to staff all the factories and offices in the cities. Now, what happened is that agriculture enabled more and more people to stop working in the fields and villages and to move to the cities. and factories and offices were able to absorb billions of new workers and clerks and teachers and so forth, and they began producing more and more products as a result. People moved from the village to the city, from working in the field to working in the factory, and the factories began to produce an avalanche of new products. Humans today produce, in consequence, far more steel. They manufacture much more clothing, and they build many more structures like houses and hotels and so forth than ever before. In addition, humans today produce a really mind-boggling collection of goods, of products, which previously nobody even imagined, like phones and cameras and dishwashers and so forth. The flood of new products realized in a moment the accumulated dreams of thousands of years. Things that humans dreamed about for thousands of years were suddenly realized within a few decades. And consequently, for the first time in human history, the supply of goods and products began to outstrip demand. There was more products than people actually wanted. And this created an entirely new economic problem, the problem of consumption. When there are so many products, who is going to buy all this new stuff? How humankind dealt with this new problem will be discussed in the next segment of this lesson.